If you're listening to this podcast, it's probably because a child you love and care for is differently wired. Are they also struggling in their current educational setting, seen only for what they're doing wrong while longing for positive relationships with peers and others? Envision a world where your child's unique abilities are not just recognized, but celebrated. A world where they can connect with others and their true potential is seen and appreciated. The Strength-Based Assessment Lab's mission is to build a world for your child just like that. Through its innovative approach, it aims to empower students, families, educators, and professionals to create positive, effective, and collaborative learning experiences. Be a part of shaping a brighter future for your child. Visit www.bgs.edu to learn more about what a strength-based assessment could mean for your family. That's bgs.edu.
So it is about bridges, but it's more about these kids and their parents and trying to find a way to fit into the world. And the fact that they were graduating, they were all about to graduate. They had a story to tell. They'd hit a certain milestone. And there was certain relief in the voices of their parents and a certain excitement in their voices that they had found what they're good at. They, of course, understood what they weren't good at. Everyone had told them what they weren't good at. But most of them had something that they were good at and were excited to go off into the world and test it.
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. I'm your host, Debbie Reber, and today I'm excited to share with you a conversation I recently had with filmmaker Tom Ropelewski. Tom is the director of the highly acclaimed documentary 2E Twice Exceptional, which came out in 2015, and he's currently wrapping up post-production on a follow-up film called 2E2, Teaching the Twice Exceptional. Tom's films center around Bridges Academy, a school for twice exceptional kids in Studio City, California, that's leading the way when it comes to meeting the educational needs of these unique learners. In our conversation, Tom shares his story and personal why behind making these films, talks about the educational model at Bridges, describes how his films are helping to bring awareness of 2E kids to the mainstream, and gives us a sneak peek of his new film, which, along with the viewer guide, will be coming out in April of this year. Here's my conversation with Tom. I hope you enjoy it. Hey, Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Debbie. How are you?
I am very good, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. I've been wanting to have you on the show for a while, so thanks so much for being here.
You're welcome.
So before we get into the meat of our conversation and learning more about your films that you've made, could you tell us just a little bit about who you are, your backstory, and then your personal why in terms of how you got brought into this particular work with 2E?
Sure. Well, my wife and I were both, for many years, Hollywood screenwriters. She still is. She wrote Mrs. Doubtfire and Limitless and the new version of Hairspray and Overboard, which just had its anniversary and it's been celebrated. But we were both comedy screenwriters, and I've written and directed for television and for movies. And as movies became more interested in the past decade in superheroes, I became less interested in that. So was looking around for different ways to be creative and making films, because I've always loved films. I was one of those kids, as a teenager who was making films in 8mm with my friends in the backyard. And so I always wanted to be a filmmaker of some sort. But lately, over the past 15 years or so, I've been less enamored with the Hollywood industry. And my wife and I have made enough ill-gotten gains that I could sort of make other kinds of film. The first one I did was about my wife's family, which is kind of a strange thing to do. Why would you make something about your father-in-law as the star? But his parents were two American artists. One was Dorothea Lange, who was a famous American photographer of the Depression, and his father was a Southwestern painter named Maynard Dixon. And during the Depression, when they couldn't afford a studio for him and a studio for her and a home, they got rid of the home and put the kids in foster care off and on for 7 years. And the movie was not about these great artists, which you could argue that they're, particularly Dorothea Lange, whose photographed Migrant Mother is probably the most iconic in American history. But what I wanted to make a film about was the family dynamic and the choice between family and art. And that film went on to win a bunch of awards in film festivals and played on PBS. And it was completely a personal project, and I really enjoyed it, and it was very satisfying to do. And I had showed it at my son's school, Bridges, and that kind of led to people saying, if you're looking for a subject, there's this class graduating that's filled with interesting kids. You might want to talk with them. So that got me into making a TUI documentary. But really what got me into making this documentary was having been a parent pulling my hair out. I think with TUI kids, it's very hard to see who they're going to be. They're not on a trajectory that you can predict. And so every step of the way, particularly when they're younger, you just don't know what they're going to be like, never mind next year, but next week. And my wife and I, when our son was 18 months old, he was reading, he wasn't reading Harry Potter, but he was reading words. And we thought it was great. It was like a parlor trick. Our friends would come over and our kid would read these things. And we brought him to our pediatrician, who said, just you wait. This is not necessarily going to be a fun road for any of you. And so indeed it was not. When our son was in a private school in Los Angeles, which talked the talk, they made us read the Mel Levine book, One Mind at a Time. But they really didn't want our child's mind. They could swing a little bit better than the public school system. But when kid is reading at 18 months and he would be in class in kindergarten and he'd walk to the library and said, I'll come back when you're teaching something I don't know, which for him was a win-win. But for the teachers and administration, it didn't quite work. So there was a certain point where, they'd be calling us in for these meetings. And like you say in your book, they make you feel you're doing something wrong. And they make you think you're not disciplining your son. Whatever it is, it's a very archaic thought process of he's not doing what we want, so it must be discipline. And maybe if you just discipline him enough, he'll listen to something boring. And so we would go in these meetings and the teachers he'd say, Dad, they're learning word wall. They're learning a, and. And the teachers would say, well, he should review it. And my son would say, Dad, you review a, and. How does someone do that? And they just wouldn't give him more challenging material. On the other hand, there were other things that were challenges to him. If there were 3 things up on the board and the teacher said, okay, do A, B, and C, and you've got an hour, he would pick the one that he liked and hyper-focus. He was one of these, he has ADHD, but it's the hyper-focus kind, where he wasn't, hopping out of his chair all the time, but if he found something he liked, he didn't understand why he couldn't spend all day doing that. And at a certain point in first grade, that school said, he's the brightest kid in the class, but it would be so nice if he wasn't here. That euphemism that they always use is maybe there's a better fit somewhere else, which I know that you're familiar with because I've read it in the book. And what we decided to do instead of, because it was, of course, it breaks your heart because you want your kid to fit in, you want your kid to be happy. And he was actually a fairly happy guy. I mean, as long as he was allowed to do what he wanted to do, he could swing with them. Some teachers loved him and some teachers were infuriated by him. But instead of finding another school, we moved to Rome for a year. And that really was the eye-opening experience. We were both working screenwriters, Hollywood screenwriters. We both had assignments, and we said, well, we could write these in Hollywood, or we could write these looking at the Pantheon. And so we moved to Rome for a year and put him in an English-speaking international school. And it was so eye-opening because he had a wonderful second-grade teacher, an Italian teacher, very theatrical, very nurturing, who had kids from all over the world who spoke all different languages, whose mastery of English was at varying degrees. And she had to be able to swing with different minds. And he loved her, and he loved the school, and he loved Rome. And we would walk down the street, and he'd say, Dad, we haven't been in that church. Let's see what's in there. The whole experience was educational, and he thrived on it. And we realized, okay, it's not us. He loves to learn. He's just sometimes hard to teach, particularly if it's something he knows or something he's not interested in. So when we went back to school, I went back to Los Angeles after a year in Rome. We found a school that kind of worked for him, but it didn't have a middle school. And then for the middle school, we found Bridges Academy, which completely changed our lives.
Yeah, so much synchronicity in our stories there, and including the moving abroad and having that kind of shake everything up in the best possible way. So lots of questions for you. I guess maybe even since you've mentioned Bridges Academy a couple times, could you just tell us briefly about this school? I know that your son attended that, I think, through graduation, just for parents who are listening who aren't familiar with Bridges.
Bridges Academy is a school in Studio City, California, that exclusively handles twice exceptional kids. They're dedicated to understanding them and learning what works for them in an educational environment. When my son was there, the school went from sixth grade. He went there in seventh grade, but it went from sixth grade through high school. Now it's down to fourth grade through high school. When he was there was about 118 students. Now there's closing in on 200 students, and now he's 20. He's about to be 22. So we're talking over the course of 9 or 10 years, and it's sort of a petri dish of trying different things that will work for these kids. One of the things that I think is just invariably effective is small class size. And there were, classes would range anywhere from 5 to 12 kids, and there'd be 2 teachers in the room. Now the class sizes are getting a bit bigger because I think they've learned different ways to individualize and differentiate their curriculum for kids. But they were trying things that were great. For example, instead of 7 classes a day in the middle school, they had 4. Instead of a 5-minute break between classes, they had a 12-minute break between classes and a 45-minute lunch break. So they really, because a lot of these kids have trouble transitioning from one class to another. And that 12 minutes really kind of, let them decompress. They'd go out into the yard. They could play with their friends. They could just transition into the next class. Also, those class lengths were about 65 minutes long as opposed to 48 or 50 minutes. And in most cases, the kids were there. It was built into the daily schedule time for the kids to do their homework with the teacher present. Now, my son was a whiz in biology, and he actually tested out of AP biology and went in 11th grade into AP genetics. But in other subjects like math, he was having a real struggle. It just wasn't getting through to him. So he would have extra time on tests. The teacher would be there to help him with his homework so that I at home didn't have to be frustrated with him being frustrated, trying to figure out the kind of advanced math that I realized I never needed to use anyway. So they were learning to do different things that I think were very effective and continue to do so.
That's fantastic. I mean, my son's twice exceptional, and Bridges has been on my radar as has been the Lang School and, some other schools. Yeah. There's so few. And, I've had a couple of experts on the podcast, including Dr. Michael Postma, who is executive director of SANG. We just had a great conversation about 2E kids. And then Dr. Devin McEachran, who specializes in diagnosing these kids. And it's something that's come up in both those conversations is how tricky it can be to get that school fit, because really that individualized approach is what's most successful because they're so unique. Their needs are so unique, but it seems like Bridges is really doing things right over there.
Well, like the Lang School in Quad Prep in New York, and there's a school in Minnesota that started earlier. They all started with a committed parent. Actually, Bridges started in the mid '90s as an after-school tutorial program for high school kids that were gifted but were failing high school. And then some of the parents said, this needs to be the school. And it was in the early part of the century, it was in a 2-room dentist office. They rented a 2-room dentist office with about 15 kids. And so, in 2003, I guess, they moved to a former Catholic girls' school in Studio City that was owned by a Osaka University, and they were using part of the space for an immersion program for their Japanese students. So they had plenty of classes. It was an old high school, so they had plenty of classroom size for the classrooms available for Bridges to rent some of the space. And over the past 5 years, we've bought the building, we've bought the property, and the school is expanding from that. But I think a lot of these newer schools have, for at least over the past few years, are now looking to Bridges as the thought leader, as the elder school that's done. I mean, not that people aren't learning all the time how to best educate TUI students, but recently, I guess it was in October, Bridges sponsored a symposium in which they honored the 7 pioneers in the field of TUI education. And we had about 120 people from all over the world, from Japan, from Australia, from Belgium, from all over. And it was interesting. I showed some clips from the new movie, and I asked, had anyone seen the first movie? And I would say of that 120, 115 had seen the movie. So one of the things the movie is doing is getting people on the same page and looking to Bridges for some answers. And it was one of the reasons that I made it. I really made it for parents like myself who just everything was fraught with anxiety. You just didn't know whether your kid was going to graduate high school, whether he was going to have problems transitioning through middle school. And so the reason the film came about is after making my first documentary, some of the administrators at the school said, well, the class of 2011, it was about to graduate, was a class that started at the dentist office building, and they've sort of seen big changes at the school, and they're also an interesting bunch of kids. And so I met with them, and their stories became the spine of the first movie. So it is about Bridges, but it's more about these kids and their parents and trying to find a way to fit into the world. And the fact that they were graduating, they were all about to graduate. They had a story to tell. They'd hit a certain milestone, and there was certain relief in the voices of their parents and a certain excitement in their voices that they had found what they're good at. They, of course, understood what they weren't good at. Everyone had told them what they weren't good at. But most of them had something that they were good at and were excited to go off into the world and test it.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Darren and I are prepping for a big move at the moment, so we are fully leaning into any and everything that simplifies things, and that absolutely includes mealtimes. At a time when my executive functioning skills are being pushed to the limit, even planning and executing dinner for our family these days can feel like a really big lift. That's why I'm especially grateful for Green Chef, a meal service that offers pre-measured and prepped ingredients to my door. Each box is packed with foods you can feel good about, like whole fruits and vegetables, plus lean protein and whole grain options. In fact, one of the things I love most about Green Chef is that they offer options that prioritize gut and brain health, with science-backed recipes that feature ingredients like fiber, antioxidants, and omega-3 fatty acids. During this time of lots of stress, it feels really grounding to know we're supporting ourselves nutritionally. I will take all the support I can get. And Green Chef doesn't just cover dinner recipes. I can add high-quality breakfasts, lunches, and snacks to my weekly box from Green Market. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. Green Chef, the #1 meal kit for eating well. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Symbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Symbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon. And that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Symbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Symbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Symbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. I'm curious to know what from your perspective as the director and creator of the film, what kind of impact you have noticed that it's had. I mean, you said that you've made it for parents. I know that it's done very well on the festival circuit and it's got a lot of attention. It seems to be on a lot of people's radars and, hopefully has just introduced the term twice exceptional into our lexicon because it seems to be a concept that so many people are not familiar with. But from your perspective, what has been the impact of the film in the world?
Well, that was the other thing that I really wanted to do, is to get everyone understanding the definition, which, believe me, psychologists had only determined a universal, or at least a universally accepted definition of 2E a couple of years ago. I mean, people weren't sure what this was, and so to get everyone at least talking on the same page and part of the same conversation was also one of the goals, and also to have parents who were all over this country and all over the world just feeling alone, feeling isolated, feeling like, am I the only one with a kid like this? And I think one of the biggest things that I'm happiest about the film is that it makes people feel that they're not alone, that there's people out there like them and people out there working to figure this out.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, do you get feedback from parents and viewers and, just what kind of information are you hearing from people who've been moved or touched by the film?
Well, it's interesting. So, I was showing it at film festivals, and it was strangely winning film festivals because I thought it was sort of a really inside baseball kind of movie, like only people who had a dog in the hunt, who really kind of had a 2E kid or were 2E people or were 2E parents or were 2E themselves would be interested. But I used the craft that of a Hollywood filmmaker. I wanted to have it not be just quote unquote educational. I wanted it to feel like a journey, like an emotional journey. You're on an emotional journey with these kids. And, it's funny. I was showing it to a film class at one point, and there's a lot of laughs in the film. People, intentional laughs. It's not laughing at the kids. It's these kids were truly witty and funny and sharp and self-aware. In a filmmaking class, one of the students said, "Why is this film so funny? Is it something you're doing, or is it just the subject matter?" And 95% of the humor comes from these kids. They were just very funny, sharp kids. But on the other hand, as a filmmaker, I knew when to cut for the laugh. I knew when to edit it in such a way that it led you to the emotional feeling that I was hoping that you'd have. So I think one of the reasons it was winning film festivals is that people didn't quite know what to expect, and they got a movie experience as well as a deeply educational experience. The other thing is that it's been playing at a lot of educational conferences, and one of the first places it played was the North Carolina Association of Gifted and Talented's yearly symposium a couple of years ago, and that was about 300 educators or so. And at the end of it was 3 days. At the end of the 3 days, a woman got up to the podium who was the head of the gifted program for all the high schools in North Carolina, and she announced she was about to set up a task force focusing completely on understanding 2E for North Carolina, and she bought 150 copies of the movie to give to every school in her district. So that's the kind of impact that it's having. It's getting people to talking about this stuff, but mainly I think it's getting people to not feel so alone.
Yeah. I mean, for me, that was my experience. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why I started Tilt in the first place too, is because I think, so many of us raising these differently wired kids, and there are a lot of parents with 2E kids in this community, it is such an isolating experience. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that intention behind the film. So, well, a couple things. First, I want to hear about your new film, the 2E2 film, which my understanding is that it's more about teaching twice exceptional kids. So can you tell us a little bit about that film, which I think is coming out this spring?
Yes. Well, you ask about what the feedback I was getting from the film, and I was traveling with the film mainly to gather intel to see what various audiences were perceiving, what they had questions about, what they wanted to know more about, if anything was unclear. And the general questions I would get from teachers were what actually does happen in the classroom, because even though there's a little of that in the first movie, it's not so much about that. Like, how do these teachers at Bridges actually engage twice exceptional students? And after about a year of these screenings, I went back to the headmaster of the school, Carl Sabatino, under whose guidance this is all happening, and he's a brilliant guy. And I said, I think there might be another film that we could make focusing more on the teachers and more about the theme of the other thing that's happening at Bridges Academy is strength-based education, is to help a student find and nurture his strength or talent, help him identify and understand his challenge, but don't define him by his challenge. And I think a lot of the mainstream American school system defines 2E kids by what they can't do. And who wants to be defined by what you can't do? Nobody does. And but that's the way it's been set up to fund extra school programs for kids that have challenges. These kids have extraordinary strengths, and you can't ignore that. And as a matter of fact, if you had to ignore one side or the other, probably better to ignore the deficit and focus on the strength, because that's what they're going to do with their lives. In most cases, some of these kids that only, build Legos and then they build something else and then they build robots, those kids are probably going to be engineers, probably not going to be a French major. So, if you're going to err on one side, and you shouldn't err on either side, actually, you should really focus on the challenges and the strengths. But focusing on the strengths is so important and primary.
Yeah, we had Dr. Gail Salt on the show, and that was one of my big takeaways. She's the author of the book, The Power of Different, and she threw out the idea of an 80-20 ratio, spending 80% of your time working in a kid's area of strength, because of exactly what you said. That is where their passions are, and that's going to be their career ultimately. And then 20% of the time, working on those areas of weakness or their deficits.
One of the things that Bridges is doing for the high school students now is they've initiated, I think this is probably the third year of it, maybe the second or third year. It's called the Badge Program. And actually, a lot of successful corporations do this for their employees too, which is part of the school day, and it becomes more the school day as they go from, I think it starts in sophomore year and go to seniors, is they can design their own curriculum for, an hour a day to pursue something that they're really interested in that the school may not have a course in. And, in most cases, it's something that's interdisciplinary. There was a kid who was interested in rocketry. And so he talked to people at JPL about rocketry and built his own little rockets. There were kids making video games. There was a kid who loved making music and was obsessed with, he would spend hours and hours on a single track. Who one of the teachers helped him make an album. And the point was not to just make the music, but to then see if he could market it, if he could do something with it, if he could sell a track to, get people interested in it commercially. I mean, this is all, the notion is to have a student pursue something he's really interested in or something that he has a real strength in that may or may not be covered in the regular school day, and to use that to, in a sense, leverage some of his challenges and to move into areas out of his comfort zone. And It's been a very successful program so far. And the new movie has a section of the movie is about that.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything, because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
Are you overwhelmed by the things that get in the way of you doing what you want to do? Are you looking for ways to simplify life to better align with your values? Do you want to create space in your schedule so you have room for more of the good stuff? Play, joy, relationships, gratitude, and more? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I invite you to check out Edit Your Life, a podcast to help you edit the unnecessary from your life so you have more room to enjoy the awesome. Through episodes with me, Christine Coe, and a range of super smart, compassionate, and thoughtful guests, you'll come away with big picture insights and practical ways to declutter your home, schedule, and mental space without getting bogged down by perfection. I have always believed that small moments and actions matter tremendously. My goal is to help you find agency and space in your life through doable baby steps that will leave you feeling accomplished instead of overwhelmed. Check out Edit Your Life wherever you enjoy your podcasts.
Listening to you say that I homeschool my child, and that's kind of how I do everything, but it's really cool to hear how it can be done in the school, because when you're working in their area of interest, so much learning about, you can really weave any topic, any subject into their area of interest if you're creative.
And of course, they have to justify it. It can't be, I want to read comic books all day. Or
right.
I want to, create the biggest Pokemon Pokedex that exists. You have to be able to justify what you want to do, and you have either one or two teacher mentors, and you might have a mentor outside of the school. If you're writing a novel, you may want to try to get someone involved. If you want to write a television pilot, you might want to get, and the school is reaching out to mentors in different areas that kids may want to, pick the brains of. And the other thing it's doing is, we know what these kids anyway, it's erasing the difference between school time and after school time, because if it's something that you're interested in, you're probably doing it after school for fun anyway. So a lot of the projects that they're doing some of them are quite complex. They bleed from the school day into the after-school day, and at the end of which they'll end up with an artifact or something that not only will look good on their college resumes, but could be helpful in applying for a job.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I'm also just so excited about the potential for this sequel film, because exactly what you said. I think in general, teachers, in the traditional educational model they want to support these kids, but they just don't have the information or the tools or just the understanding, to even recognize necessarily a 2E kid, but then how to support them. So it's really exciting to see people like you doing this work that's going to help the many, many, many kids who can, for whatever reason, can't afford it, or they don't have access to geographically or whatever to schools that would cater to their specific differences.
There's an old Charles Schulz Peanuts cartoon, and it's Charlie Brown and Linus talking, and Linus says, "My teacher says teaching is like bowling. The best you can hope for is you roll the ball down the middle and you hit as many pins as you can." And Charlie Brown looks at him and says, "She must be a terrible bowler." because that is the mainstream school system. It's not. It's often not the fault of the teachers. Every teacher I meet, they want to do the best for all their kids.
Yeah.
And they don't want to just hit most of them and ignore the rest. And one of the things that's happening at Bridges is that the things that we're learning through strength-based education not only apply to 2E kids, they apply to every student. Every single kid could benefit from this. Mm-hmm. Who doesn't want to be taught with a focus on your strength? Who doesn't want to be supported for your challenge but not defined by your challenge?
Absolutely. I mean, I feel that way about so much of what we cover here. And until, I had Dr. Ross Green on the podcast recently, who wrote many books, including The Explosive Child, but his recent book, Raising Human Beings, it's like, this is really good for all kids. And I think that's so true for everything that we're doing with our kids. It would benefit everybody.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be playing an excerpt from the upcoming film. And I'd love if you could just tell us a little bit about it. We'll be playing the How Brains Work expert that you shared with me. So can you talk a little bit about that?
I knew the general theme of this movie would be strength-based education. And kind of on the same wavelength of you, I approached it from everyone is wired differently. Every single person is there's some people that can play in the mainstream easier than some of the others, but everyone is wired slightly differently. So the first question I asked students as I interviewed them was, how does your brain work? And I got some very interesting answers. How does your brain work?
Well, I think of my brain as a living organism in my head. I know some animals have it in their stomachs or legs. That's pretty freaky for us, but I like to think of it metaphorically and psychologically as this sort of thought train and an oil drill, but it's sort of drilling out facts and information. It's like a whole world.
My brain runs at a gazillion miles an hour, thinking of every possible way that something can work and every possible way that something can go horribly wrong.
I've always kind of been curious as to why the brain does what it does, why I get stressed a lot, why does this happen? Does this happen a lot to normal people? Does this happen to people with Asperger's or who are on the autism spectrum?
A lot of people always tell me that I'm really, really smart. I mean, I thought that myself for a while, but I was wondering maybe I was so stupid that I thought I was smart, but apparently I'm not.
I love that. And I'm really excited about the new film. And do you have information about when it's coming out? Do you have a release date yet?
I don't. The thing is, we're a little behind. My composer had a family emergency, and so he's doing the score, and so we're several weeks behind. But I think we'll have it. Everything will be completed by probably sometime in March. And if you're interested, you can check out the website 2emovie.com, where the first film is available, and the second film, there'll be information about when that's going to be available. You can sign up for my mailing list, which will let you know whenever anything is available, and also you'll get little clips, little sneak peeks from the new movie and from other things that I'm shooting over the course of any given year.
Well, yeah, the website's fantastic, and I was watching a bunch of clips in preparation for this conversation, and I loved the student updates. And just as a parent of a 2E kid, and as you said in the beginning of this conversation, it's really hard to know what this is going to look like down the road because it is such a fluid situation.
Yeah. Well, one of the students in the first film had such anxiety, very bright kid, such anxiety. He couldn't sleep at night. His mother, when he was, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, would drive him around in the car at night, and he'd put his feet up on the dashboard and feel the bass of the radio, and that calmed him down. And as he got older, he got interested in music. He picked up the bass, was a prodigy, terrific bass player, and now last summer his band opened for John Fogerty at the Hollywood Bowl. So, I mean, these kids sometimes they move in the direction that they're going, and he's certainly a success story. There was another girl named Sydney who would do nothing when she was in the early years of middle school but draw. She just loved to draw. She didn't like to write. She didn't like to do anything. So for a while in the middle school, like if she in chemistry or biology, they would let her do comic strips to illustrate what she knew. Now, who cares if you write an essay or you do comic strips as long as you've shown that you're proficient in the material. She graduated from high school. She went to CalArts. She immediately after that got a job on the Muppets television show from a couple of years ago. That got canceled. But she's pursuing art commercially now. I haven't been in touch with her for a few months, so I'm not sure exactly what she's doing. But it's going to be in the field of art, and she now is a good writer. But it was because they didn't force writing down her throat at an early age. They let her come at it from her own strength. And then kind of eased her into writing when she needed to write.
Yeah, I loved watching that video about her story in particular. That's really exciting and cool again, and inspiring for me, certainly. And I'm sure it's inspiring for our listeners to hear too. And before we go, you and I, before the conversation, we're talking about your son who is going to university across the country. So how's that all working out?
Well, here's the interesting thing. He was a kid who always loved biology, always loved animals, memorized every animal, could tell you one of those, I don't know if he has a photographic memory, but darn close. And he just loved life sciences. And that was his strength. Like I said, he tested out of honors biology, and he took genetics instead in 11th grade. He was convinced he was going to go to He wanted to pursue the life sciences. But on around 11th grade, and I find that this sometimes happens with twice exceptional students, is he's a big thinker and he's a deep thinker and a far-reaching thinker, but he was also in some ways more mature, intellectually more mature, physically and emotionally less mature than most kids his age. Not necessarily than most TUI kids, but than the norm. And as he hit 11th grade, he really began to go into a deep funk because he saw the SATs were coming, and the SATs meant going into college. That meant leaving home. He wasn't sure he wanted to leave home. And his grades started to tank in 11th grade. He just was morose. He usually was excited to go to school, particularly at Bridges. And I was just feeling a funk. And he said, "Dad, I don't want to take the SATs. I want to take a gap year. I just want to focus on my academics and graduate from high school strong, and then deal with college and deal with this stuff." And of course, as a parent, you wonder if a student steps off that conveyor belt, whether they'll ever get on again. But indeed, it's a conveyor belt, and it's not necessarily going anywhere. So I knew he knew himself well enough that my wife and I trusted him. And so he didn't take the SATs in 11th grade. He didn't take the SATs in 12th grade. He graduated from Bridges. He then took that we at that point decided that we were, my wife is from the Bay Area, so we had spent a lot of time in Los Angeles, but I'd always loved San Francisco. So we moved to San Francisco after he had graduated from Bridges. And he got a job at the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito, which is, I think, the foremost marine mammal hospital in the world, or close to it. And he got a job as the only intern in the lab, and he was analyzing the blood of dead sea lions, and they were trying to figure out why they were having aneurysms, and he was working with the CDC. So he said, "Okay, I really want to stay in the life sciences." So that year he took his SATs. That was the year that we went and visited colleges, but because he knew he wanted to be in biology, we were mainly staying on the coasts. We looked at some schools in the Northeast. We looked at the school Eckerd in Florida, which he really he liked. He'd never been to Florida. The campus is like a Club Med spa. It was terrific. And I think most of us go to college because they have an emotional feeling when you get there. It's like, this place is for me. I had that. And he said, "I want to go to Eckerd," which was, now here was a kid that if you sent him to summer to camp, you'd get a call 4 hours later, "He hates it here, come get him." I mean, he's traveled around the world with us, but he never really liked he doesn't like loud noises. He doesn't like kids screaming, camp songs. He doesn't like any of that stuff. And it was never successful. So we were a little concerned that, 3,000 miles away was a long way. But having had the gap year, it gave him some time to be sick of us. It gave him some time to to say, gee, maybe I can do this. It's sort of like a light switch went off. Like there was a point at which he was concerned about moving away. He was anxious about it. And then he couldn't wait to do it. And that was the thing I was most concerned about when he went away was, is he going to hate the distance? And that's the thing that worked perfectly. So anyway, for the first year, he was a biology major, but because of math, chemistry has always been his kryptonite. He has a hard time with chemistry, and he was struggling in biology to some degree, but he was sticking with it. And last year with the American elections, he became obsessed with it, and he began to come up with algorithms, and he came up with a system where he predicted 49 of the 50 Democratic primaries. And about a month before the general election, he called me and said, Dad, Trump is going to win. And here's why. And he predicted what he called the Rust Belt blowout, which is the Minnesota, Wisconsin, these states going for Trump that had normally been blue states. And he was doing middling in biology. And at a certain point, his advisor said, are you sure you don't want to be a poli-sci major? And so now he's a poli-sci major. He just decided this was his area of passion right now. And as far as I'm concerned, whatever makes him happy, whatever he's interested in, he's a very interesting kid. And whatever he's going to do, I think is going to be pretty extraordinary. And I can't predict what it's going to be.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. It's, again, I just love hearing all this and what it could look like. And I also just appreciate your attitude. It is really about supporting our kids and finding their own joy, what's going to fulfill them. And it's really cool to hear. So thank you.
Are you welcome?
Well, listen, I'm going to let you go. I'm super excited to be bringing this conversation with our listeners and for this next film to come out. So listeners, I will be including all the links that we talked about, including the link to the 2emovie.com website so you can see some trailers and get a sneak peek of what's coming. So check out the show notes page. And Tom, good luck with the movie release. And thank you again for just stopping by and sharing with us today.
And thank you, Debbie.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. For the show notes for this episode, including links to the website for Tom's films, where you can learn how to see them, view clips, and more, as well as all the other resources we discussed, visit tiltparenting.com/session98. And a quick shout out to Hannah Ross, a new supporter of the Tilt Parenting Podcast. Thank you so much for helping out. And if you like what you heard and want to join Hannah in helping me cover the cost of producing this weekly podcast, as well as making transcripts available, please consider supporting my Patreon campaign. Patreon is an online platform that allows people to make a small monthly contribution, as little as $2 a month, to support the work of an artist or a musician, or in my case, a podcaster. It's super easy to sign up. Just visit patreon.com/tiltparenting. That's patreon.com/tiltparenting, or you can find a link on the Tilt Parenting website. Lastly, this is my weekly pitch to head over to iTunes and leave a rating or a review, or both if you haven't done so already. There are a lot of parenting podcasts out there, and ratings and reviews help keep our podcast highly visible, which in turn makes it easier for me to land those big guests. Thank you so much. And thanks again for listening. For more information on Tilt Parenting, visit www.tiltparenting.com.
Hey, are you a parent of a teenager? Are you feeling overwhelmed about how to be what they need while also holding limits and boundaries that keep them safe? Are you tired of conversations that negate how messy this season of parenting is? Well, I've got you. My name is Casey O'Rourke. I am a positive discipline trainer, parent coach, and the host of the Joyful Courage podcast. Every week, I come to you with an interview digging into tough topics with experts I trust and solo shows that go deep into the personal growth and mindset needed to raise teens in a way that grows them into confident, capable young people. I am not afraid of getting real about the intersection of conscious parenting and the teen years, while also bringing in vulnerability, humor, and lightness. I'm walking the path with you and honored to serve. Listen to Joyful Courage on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you consume podcasts.